We're going to start with a roll call, and we'll start with Asada Brown.
Here.
And next we have Cecily Harris. I'm not sure I saw her. Todd Kemery.
Todd told us he won't be able to make it today.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Bob Moeller.
I am here.
And Jeremy Peichel.
Also present.
And Canna Yang.
Here.
And Anthony Taylor. Don't see him yet. And Monica Dillenberg.
Here.
And then Tony Russo.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum.
Excellent, thank you. We'll call ourselves to order, and our first item here is approval of our agenda as posted online. We can accept this by just a general consent, so I'll just call, does anybody have any changes they wish to suggest for our agenda? Okay, hearing none, we can consider our agenda approved. That'll move us on to approval of minutes from our June 3rd meeting. That we will take a motion second and roll call vote on. So we could have a motion from anyone who was present at that meeting.
So moved.
Motion from Bob. Is there a second?
Jeremy seconds.
Thank you, Jeremy. Are there any corrections for those minutes? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed with a roll call to vote on approval of the minutes as presented. You can go ahead with that now, Sandy.
Okay, good to know I can be replaced. We'll start with Asada Brown.
Okay.
And then I don't think Cecily Harris, is she on yet? Don't see her. Todd Kemery is not here. Bob Moeller.
Mhm. Aye.
Okay. Jeremy Peichel.
Jeremy votes aye.
Canna Yang.
Aye.
Anthony Taylor, not here yet. Monica Dillenberg.
Aye.
And Tony Russo.
Aye.
All right, those minutes are approved.
Okay, thank you. Brings us to the public invitation portion of our meeting, which we have been taking as emails to me ahead of the meeting with our remote setup right now. I have not received any about items not on the agenda for today. So I'll mention some later, but nothing for this period. That brings us then to our first business item, which is the Vadnais Snail Lake Regional Park Master Plan Amendment for Ramsey County. We have Colin ready to present.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Thank you. As the chair mentioned, I am Colin Kelly, planning analyst, and I'm here to present the Vadnais Snail Lake Regional Park Master Plan Amendment on behalf of Ramsey County. I should note that Brett, aka Gus Bloomer, Ramsey County landscape architect and project manager, is also on the line today and may respond to questions at the end of the presentation as appropriate. Next slide, please. Vadnais Snail Lakes Regional Park is located near the center of the regional park system in Ramsey County. The figures on the left and in the center are figures 1 and 2 in the staff report. The regional park consists of 1,696 acres, including the 444-acre Snail and Grass Lake section located in Shoreview, and the 1,252-acre Vadnais and Sucker Lake section located in Vadnais Heights. This technical master plan amendment focuses on providing a plan for the Snail and Grass Lake section to be more resilient to climate change, particularly flooding concerns, with specific actions to replace existing park infrastructure, including trails, picnic facilities, and parking facilities. The figure on the right is figure 3 in the staff report. This plan amendment does not address the Vadnais and Sucker Lake section of the regional park. Next slide, please. Since the park was at the center of a multiple-year flooding event that extended beyond the park boundaries, people were generally already engaged when the plan amendment process ramped up in 2019. That said, public engagement for the plan amendment was intended to reach as wide an audience as possible and focused on gathering feedback both regionally and from residents who live near the regional park. In-person public meetings held prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic were well attended. Pop-up meetings, also held prior to the pandemic, encouraged participation amongst residents of all ages. Online feedback was generally provided by residents living closer to the park, and 7,000 residents in the immediate area were notified of the planning process through the mail. In addition, social media platforms were used to get the word out even further. Finally, the plan amendment was available for a 30-day public review last winter. Partnering agencies and jurisdictions were also involved with the issues related to high water and flooding before the plan amendment process began, and Ramsey County has engaged those partners throughout the planning process. They included the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, Metropolitan Council Environmental Services, or MCES, Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District, Vadnais Lakes Water Management Organization, Ramsey County Public Works, and the cities of Shoreview, Vadnais Heights, and Little Canada. Generally, the comments received from both the public and the partners closely align with the themes and topics that make up the remainder of this presentation, focused on infrastructure, amenities, and natural resources. Next slide, please. The plan amendment focuses its development concept, or perhaps more appropriately, redevelopment concept, on 3 segments of the Snail and Grass Lake section. Those segments include the Snail Lake Picnic Area, the Corridor segment, also known as the Wetland A area, and the Grass Lake segment. This slide focuses on the Snail Lake Picnic Area segment. The figure on the right is figure 4 in the staff report. To make this segment of the regional park resilient to future high water, the plan amendment proposes to relocate the flooded small picnic shelter closer to the beach at a higher elevation, redevelop the lower parking lot to improve accessibility, circulation, lighting, and stormwater infrastructure, and create open space for volleyball or other amenities if space allows. Additional future improvements include relocating flooded picnic tables to flood-resilient elevations and making accessibility improvements to the beach building. Improved accessibility of the boarding dock at the boat launch is also a priority. The development concept also proposes a new short trail segment which will act as a tunnel bypass and connect to the crosswalk at Snail Lake Boulevard and McCubbin Street. Next slide, please. In the corridor segment to the east of the Snail Lake Picnic Area, the plan amendment proposes to reestablish trails that flooded along the east side using a boardwalk system where existing paved trails are no longer feasible, combining a fixed boardwalk running north and south and 2 boardwalk segments running east and west. Figure in the center is figure 6 in the staff report. The photos on the right are from a field visit in mid-June, showing different trail segments still underwater in spite of a relatively dry year so far. The plan amendment notes that the natural trails in the corridor segment will remain in their current alignment and unpaved state as requested by members of the public. And Ramsey County is working with MCES to consider shared recreational facilities that can be used for both trails and maintenance equipment as needed. Next slide, please. In the Grass Lake segment, the plan amendment proposes a trail loop that encircles the entire lake using a combination of paved trails, natural surface trails, and boardwalks. Figure on the right is figure 7 in the staff report. 2,100 linear feet of boardwalk will connect the east and west trails along the southern park boundary. Natural surface trails will be used on the west side of the lake, along with an additional 600 feet of boardwalk. In addition, Ramsey County will continue to coordinate with MCES to relocate a trunk sewer line, restore woodlands, and ultimately develop a new 12-foot wide paved trail in the area cleared for the pipe. As in other segments, the county intends to make improvements to trail elevations in the Grass Lake segment, where needed, to reduce flooding and ensure usability. That's really what this plan amendment is all about. Resiliency to future high water and maintaining or improving trail connectivity and accessibility. Next slide, please. The native vegetation most likely present here at the time of the public land survey in the late 1800s consisted of quote-unquote big woods, or hardwood tree species like oak, maple, basswood, and hickory. Areas mapped as oak openings, barrens, wet prairie, and lakes were also present. The regional park straddles the mapped boundary of two ecological subsections, or areas of distinct topography, bedrock formations, and distribution of plants, especially trees. Eastern half of the park is located in the Anoka Sand Plain ecological subsection, while the western half, the focus of this plan amendment, is located in the St. Paul Baldwin Plains and Moraine subsection. The oak woodlands and wetland portions of the corridor section and all of the Grass Lake section are classified by Ramsey County as environmental natural areas, which have significant, sensitive, and/or unique natural resources that warrant extended preservation. These areas are designated for increased habitat protection, ecological restoration, passive recreation, and environmental education. Current restoration projects include an oak woodland and wetland buffer restoration project and shoreline vegetation and stabilization project. Ramsey County is partnering with the Ramsey County Metro Watershed District in both of these restoration efforts. Next slide, please. The plan amendment estimates $3,850,000 in development and infrastructure costs. The biggest ticket items in that overall estimate include the installation of 1,200 linear feet of boardwalk in the area of primary flooding in the corridor segment, estimated at $1.8 million, and the relocation of the small shelter and redevelopment of the lower parking area in the Snail Lake Picnic Area segment, estimated at $1.25 million. Approval of the plan does not commit the council to any funding at this time. Further council action is required to authorize state and council funds for regional park implementing agencies. Next slide, please. The Vadnais Snail Lake Regional Park Master Plan Amendment is consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, particularly Planning Strategy 1, Master Plan requirements, as well as other council policies included in Thrive MSP 2040. Next slide, please. So the proposed action before you then is that the Metropolitan Council approve Ramsey County's Vadnais Snail Lake Regional Park Master Plan Amendment and require Ramsey County, prior to initiating any development of the regional park, to send preliminary plans to the Environmental Services Assistant Manager at the Metropolitan Council's Environmental Services Division. And with that, I will stand for any comments or questions you may have and remind you that Ramsey County staff is on hand as well. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Colin. Okay, commissioners, what questions do we have for him or county staff?
Tony, this is Jeremy. I've got a question.
All right, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was curious about the passive recreation limitations for the park. I recognize that especially with the installation of boardwalk, there might be interest in park users fishing either from the boardwalks or from portions of the nearshore trail. Is there any interest in accommodating those uses within the context of Ramsey County's plans, or is that something that would be left aside as more of a consumptive activity on the park?
So I'm assuming I'm going to take that, Colin.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Peichel, this is Gus Bloomer, and if it pleases the commission, it would be great if you'd like to respond, Gus.
Great. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Chair and members of the commission. And first of all, I hope you can hear me okay. I just want to double check my mic. Okay. And to answer your question, the Ramsey County is committed to actually continuing the public engagement for each individual project that will come out of this master plan amendment and the overall master plan. So to gauge people's desire to, for instance, fish off a boardwalk is something we're interested in knowing. And then the boardwalk would be fitted with areas to accommodate that use. So does that answer your question?
That does. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Because I have one about kind of what you're looking at for boardwalk. I know there's some things that are perhaps still a little bit in flux from what I hear. Do we know, are some of these maps places where like might be boardwalks or they're already planned, or what still needs to be considered for some of those possibilities? Where do some of those plans stand? Because with the contacts that we did get to Jeremy and myself were primarily around wanting to lessen the amount of boardwalk where possible. But I know there's some logistical concerns that require them. I'm just wondering to what extent what we're seeing is known and what's unknown still.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. So I would say to answer your question, it's a little bit of a moving target in that we are, the infrastructure is really dependent upon new modeling and things we're getting from the watershed district. And so actually even up to a couple of months ago, we've been in contact with members of the board of Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District, and they've made some adjustments even to some of the elevations based on improvements on projects they've made outside of the park itself, that we think we can lower things, which would mean potential reduction in boardwalk. And of course, now we're in a drought. So, people are probably going to wonder, why did they put the boardwalk in at that elevation? It's like, well, we forget the water was at, a much higher elevation at one point. So we have to try to put infrastructure back that both can work in the high water conditions and also in low water conditions. So we don't have a boardwalk 10 feet out of off the ground. So long story, it's going to be, that's something that'll be refined further, working with the partner agencies and the public to understand the desire and the requirements. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, pretty much tells that there's still some work to do here.
Definitely, yeah, yep. And we wanted to, the graphics and the plan that you see, that's sort of the maximum amount, but we wanted to leave it flexible. So if we can continue to have a paved trail based on some new modeling or something, and the trail exists in elevation now that's safer because of other improvements that have happened in the movement of water through the watershed district, then that was really to the desire of the public engagement that we heard. So the goal is not to just put boardwalks everywhere and be done. It's to really think about it, be flexible and pragmatic. So.
Okay. And then one other question raised about kind of, I guess, materials and design of whatever boardwalks do end up being necessary. Someone pointed out that there is a certain amount of sound that comes off of boardwalks, especially when you put bicycles and things over them. You get kind of that tupa on them. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that exists in modern materials and construction that allows you to kind of make a boardwalk seem a little bit more like a different kind of surface in terms of both the aesthetics and the sound and how it fits into the environment overall?
Yes, boardwalks can be made of a variety of materials. We see them in metal, plastics, wood of various thicknesses and widths, and then concrete, and they all have pluses and minuses to them. In this case, and based on where the boardwalk is located, you know, concrete from aesthetic probably doesn't make the most sense. Plastic has a lot of, actually over long lengths, it's hot and it has static electricity issues to it. So then we're sort of left with wood, and there's all kinds of different wood species. And that will have to be further investigated to look at the size and width of the planks and the attachments and the frame and how it all goes together to try to reduce noise as one thing. Slip resistance will have to be looked at as well. So that's all things that we'll be looking at with the next individual project that would come out of this.
Okay. Thank you. What other questions do commissioners have?
If no one else has something, I've got two more, Tony.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. This is Jeremy. I was curious about the resident geese issues and waterfowl fouling up trails and paths. Is that a concern for restoration, or particularly with boardwalks? I've seen some areas where these are implemented where it can get to be quite challenging or uncomfortable to use a boardwalk when the geese are using it more than the people.
Sure. I believe that's probably the case even with trails, from what I've seen as well. I'm anticipating that in a lot of the areas we're proposing boardwalk, there will have to be a railing system with it, and that railing system should generally prevent geese or waterfowl from, you know, resting up on them like they would in like more of like a dock situation that doesn't have railings on it. But it's definitely an issue for water quality in this park and really across any urban environment, metro. There are procedures that the county has taken in the past, like goose roundups. We've hired people with dogs to harass the geese, sound. All those things are currently being implemented. So that's, and you know, I can get you more information on that, but it wasn't really addressed fully in this plan, but those are some of the things we've been doing across the system.
Okay. And then when you were addressing Tony's other question, I was thinking back to, and maybe Colin can address this, in the item, there was a discussion about how the hydrologist for DNR, I believe it was, had said there was not an anticipated change to the ordinary high water mark, but there was also talk about the 10-foot fluctuation between the dry period, the wet period, and now the modifications to help Snail Lake drain more effectively all the way down to Vadnais. And I'm curious, with those changes in hydrology, is there an intent to do some groundwater monitoring or some water budget monitoring for this area to ensure that we establish a resilient ordinary high water mark?
Sure. So to answer your question, you have to think about water in two different arenas. One is surface water, and those surface waters are managed, if it's a lake, by the DNR. If it's outside of a lake 100-year floodplain, it's a watershed district. And if it's groundwater, it's not entirely clear whose jurisdiction that is. And we've had these discussions over the course of years now with the watershed district for this particular area. And I don't have a good answer for monitoring that. Ramsey County Parks in general doesn't have a plan to do that. So I don't know if there's another agency out there that would take that on, or where discussions are at regarding that. Regarding the surface water, though, the Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District has done vast studies now since 2016, 2015, when the water started having issues across their watershed district, from here really all the way down to the watershed district, or to the Mississippi River. And they've systematically been making those improvements to help with efficiency so water doesn't back up as much. So did I answer your question? That was kind of a long rambling response.
Yeah, that's fine. I was curious about the groundwater piece in particular, given the nature of the system here, and if there's not really a responsible party, it's going to be hard to find out who's going to do that work.
That's correct. And it's interesting because Snail Lake actually doesn't have a natural outlet. It's completely reliant on infiltration or evaporation to rid itself of water. Whereas to some degree wetland area, and then of course Grass Lake, Wabasso, Wassel, they all flow through. Those generally are more based on flow out through Vadnais, which rather than just infiltration. So it's very complex, but the groundwater issue is something that's sort of no pun intended, floating out there, I guess.
That's all I had. Thanks, Tony.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. In terms of animal impacts on trails, you guys didn't get to see the fun impact of when the trail is covered in migrating minnows and tadpoles.
We did have lots of carp crossing the trail at Grass Lake when it was flooded, so that was exciting.
Were they also grass carp?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I have photos and videos of them swimming on the trail. So
yeah, it was pretty gross when you were trying to get a bicycle around them without squishing them.
Yeah.
Oh, and to your allusion to fishing, Jeremy, Grass Lake is very shallow, and as far as I know, I don't think the DNR even does a fishery survey on it. So while it does have some things in it, it's not really it's not a game fish spot.
Right, Tony. My point was not about whether it was a good place to fish. It was about whether people would fish it.
Sure.
And in my experience with people using parks, if there's a body of water, it's going to get a line in it.
Yeah. Those lines will mostly come up with weeds, but you can try. Anyone else have questions or wish to start motions?
I'll move the proposed action.
Okay, we have a motion for the proposed action from the staff report. Is there a second for that?
This is Dillenburg. I second that.
Okay, thank you, Monica. So the motion is that the Metropolitan Council, 1, approve Ramsey County's Vadnais Snail Lake Regional Park Master Plan Amendment, and 2, require Ramsey County, prior to initiating any development of the regional park, to send preliminary plans to the Environmental Services Assistant Manager at the Metropolitan Council's Environmental Services Division. Is there discussion on the motion?
The only thing I'd offer on this proposed action is I'm really grateful. I know Todd's not here. He usually is the one that tends to bring up accessibility, but I like the combination of this master plan amendment to bring climate resilience and precipitation resilience together with, bringing this beautiful natural area into a greater accessibility and greater options for people of all ages and levels of ability. So I commend Ramsey County for their outreach and their planning on this, because it really does look like a fantastic plan amendment.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. I guess one thing that I'll mention to Colin, I don't know how you want to note this. When this goes to the CDC step, we have the known support and opposition section. There are a couple of neighbors who have partial opposition to some of the aspects around the boardwalk. Seems like not necessarily to the entire plan, but some concerns there that they've also brought up with Ramsey County at other stages. So just to note that that does exist rather than saying no known on that piece.
I've made a note, Chair Russo, and we'll include that in the summary of today's discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarification, this is Sandy. Did you say that was a noted opposition to the plan?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, we'll go on to a roll call vote on the motion for the proposed action from the staff report. Sandy, you can take that away when you're ready.
Okay, great. Can we start with Asada Brown?
Aye.
Todd, let's see, Todd's not here, Cecily's not here. Bob Moeller,
Aye.
Jeremy Peichel,
Aye.
Canna Yang,
Aye.
Monica Dillenberg,
Aye.
and Tony Russo.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries.
All right, thank you, Sandy. That'll bring us on then to our second business item, the annual Metropolitan Regional Parks operation and maintenance allocation. We have Abdi Wahid to present that. Go ahead.
Afternoon, everybody. How are you guys doing today?
All right, thank you.
Been already a year. It's good to see everybody again.
You are a bit quiet, however, if you have any ability to move the mic in.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. I will share the PowerPoint presentation, if that's okay.
I believe Greg Ritchie already has it up.
Perfect, okay. Awesome, thank you. Again, today I will be presenting on business item 2020-162, the annual Metropolitan Regional Parks operations and maintenance allocation. Next slide, please. Thank you. The O&M, as it's commonly known, or the operation and maintenance program, is written in State Statute 473.351. And in this state statute, it requires that by July 15th of each year, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the council the funding requests from the implementing agencies based on the actual expenditures made in the previous year. The state legislature funds a portion of the expenses necessary to run the regional park system because the system draws a significant percentage of its visits from outside the metropolitan area and the state of
Chair,
Minnesota.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was trying to use the chat, but I think a couple members and myself are still having a hard time in hearing.
Yeah, I think we were able to hear you when you were kind of holding the mic in, then when you let go of
Okay.
it again, it kind of bounced back a bit.
Can you guys hear me now?
It doesn't need to be quite that close, somewhere in between those two.
Oh, apologies. Is this better?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that'll be okay.
I'll hold it. That's okay.
Perfect.
And I'll just repeat the bullets again. So the MN State Statute 473.351 requires that by July 15th of each year, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the council the funding requests from the implementing agencies based on the actual expenditures made in the previous year. The state legislature funds a portion of the expenses necessary to run the regional parks system because the system draws a significant percentage of its visits from outside the metropolitan area and the state of Minnesota. The law requires the council to review the operating expenses each year for eligibility for each agency for eligibility on an annual basis. Next slide, please. The O&M formula is distributed based on a formula in state statute, in which 40% is based on the previous year's O&M expenses, 40% based on the previous year's proportionate share of total system visits, and 20% based on previous year's proportionate share of total acreage. As you'll note in the April MPOS meeting, there was an info item stating that the 2020 visits weren't able to happen, so we ended up using the 2019 numbers for this year's O&M calculations due to the pandemic. Next slide, please. This slide here clearly details last year's, or the 2020 O&M reported expenses per agency. As you'll note, Hennepin and Scott are a portion of it is combined. And then this year we added the funding distribution. So this breaks down each agency's percentage. When we did this, and you'll note in your MPOSC business item, the state legislature was still in a special session, but as of today, obviously, the bills have passed. And you will note on the SFY 2022 distribution amount each implementing agency's share for O&M in the state fiscal year 2022. And next slide, please. During our review and preparation for this business item, we noted an error in last year's calculations, and here this table details sort of the correction, not sort of, but the corrections that will happen. Right now, staff are working through the mechanics or logistics of how that correction will take place. What happened was staff forgot to include the trail acreage, and so we'll be correcting this error soon. Next slide, please. Again, just to recap of the O&M business item. Again, state fiscal year 2021 allocation will be corrected, the error. And then state fiscal year 2022 appropriation has been signed by the governor, of which the total 2.54 million will be from the general fund and 7.45 will be from the lottery in lieu. This amount is an increase of 850,000 in the lottery in lieu for each fiscal year compared to the last biennium. Next slide, please. And recommended action. For this year's annual O&M MPOS business item, the recommended action is, the MPOS reports to the Metropolitan Council, the Regional Parks System State Fiscal Year 2022 Operation and Maintenance Funding Requests, reports to the Metropolitan Council corrections to the state fiscal year 2021 Operation and Maintenance Funding Distribution. Next slide, please. I think that's all for this business item. Any questions?
All right, thank you. So for our newer commissioners, just as a bit of background, the amounts of all of this is all set up by formulas and distributed essentially automatically once the legislature decides on their amount of appropriation. And the amounts that are spent outside of that are up to the individual agencies. But we are required to make a report to the council. So our business item is just that we got numbers and we are now reporting them. And have had a chance to look at things. So essentially that chart in table 1 and table 2, these details of this is our business item is saying we saw those, and as far as we know, they're good. So with that, what questions do you have, if any?
This is Jeremy. I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yes, Jeremy.
Has there been any feedback from the implementing agencies about perceived fairness or any request for adjustments to the 2019 visitor numbers based on actual activity identified during the pandemic?
Thank you for that question, Jeremy. As far as I know, I have not heard anything, but I'll defer it to others from the council if they have heard anything from the implementing agencies.
Chair, Commissioners, this is Emmett. I have not heard any concerns raised on that point, Jeremy. It's a good question. As Abdi Wahab noted, we are using the 2019 use estimate numbers because we canceled the use estimate during the pandemic. which is kind of sad because I think our anecdotal information pointed to significant increases in use. And yet we're doing the best we can. And the law says use the most recent visitation numbers in the funding formulas. And so that's what we're doing. And I think that the park agencies have been very understanding. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so what Emmett was getting at with the, in terms of the most recent part, is the actual statute doesn't say that it actually is annual. It's what we've been doing, and it says to use the most recent, so we're still complying with that, even if it's a departure from our normal procedure. Any other questions, or anyone wish to make a motion on this?
Yeah, I do have a question. This is Monica Dillenburg. I know I don't want to go too into details, but since it's the first time that I see the budget and I want to understand, what's the difference between the general fund and the lottery in lieu fund? Sorry about the question, I guess.
That's a good question. And sorry, I might have missed your name, Commissioner.
No problem.
So the lottery in lieu is it basically an estimate, a monthly estimate, based on actual amounts distributed by lottery ticket revenues. Now, the one thing that can happen with the lottery in lieu is if lottery ticket sales fall short of projections, then the monthly distributions will be reduced, commensurately. That hasn't happened yet, and hopefully we don't experience it. And I've heard anecdotally that lottery in lieu has increased, maybe during the pandemic, which is a good thing for parks.
I think to expand on a couple other pieces of that in terms of, so you answered the timing aspect where that is estimated in advance. But in terms of where the money actually comes from, Monica, we have I believe a 1988 constitutional amendment to the state constitution saying that a certain share of the income from the state lottery would be dedicated to natural resource causes in various ways. So we get a portion of that money, much in the same way that the legacy amendment from 2008 works. It has a little bit different rules than that one, but it's the same dedicated fund from a particular sale of stuff, whereas general fund is the direct allocations made by the legislature each year. That is up to their discretion, whereas the constitutionally allocated funds are not discretionary to the legislature.
Thank you. Now I get it. Thanks.
Anyone else?
I'll move approval of the budget.
Okay, so we have a motion for the recommended action, I believe, from Bob. Do we have a second for that?
I second.
And who was that?
Brown.
Brown, thank you. Second from Brown. So that motion is that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the Metropolitan Council the Regional Park System State Fiscal Year 2022 operation and maintenance funding requests, and reports to the Metropolitan Council corrections to the state fiscal year 2021 operation and maintenance funding distribution. And that latter part is the accounting for trail acreage piece. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to a roll call vote on that. Go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We'll start with Asada Brown.
Aye.
And next we'll go to Bob Moeller.
Votes aye.
Jeremy Peichel,
Aye.
Kenny Yang,
Aye.
Monica Dillenburg,
Aye.
and Tony Russo.
Aye.
That motion carries.
Okay, thank you. So that passes. Our third and final business item is the Regional Park System Equity Grant Program 2021 funding recommendations. It's our big final thing. Jessica Lee is presenting on that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, Council Member, and Commissioners. I am Jessica Lee, Senior Park Planner, presenting business item 2021-161, the Regional Park System 2021 Equity Grant Program funding recommendations. Next slide, please. As a reminder, Thrive 2040 and the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan committed the Council to developing a competitive equity grant program for projects that strengthen equitable use of the parks across age, race, ethnicity, income, national origin, and ability. In 2019, a pilot program made $300,000 available for capital projects. The Council received 15 applications requesting well over $1 million. 3 projects were funded, including Dakota Homeland Interpretation along the Minnesota River Greenway in Dakota County, art and architecture components of the Waukon Teepee Center at Bruce Vento Regional Trail in St. Paul, and part of the Bede-Makaska Cloudman Memorial Interpretive Project at the Minneapolis Chain of Lakes Regional Park. The pilot program produced many great capital equity proposals, far more than we had funding for, and showed that there is a need for non-capital funds to support equity programming. Next slide, please. The pilot program was a great success, and the Council responded by dedicating more funds for the 2021 round. This year, we have $664,000 in Council bonds for capital projects and $1.4 million in parks interest earnings prioritized for programming projects. I also want to note that agencies were allowed to apply for as many projects as they wanted, but they're limited to a total funding of $400,000 each, $200,000 from Council bonds and $200,000 from interest earnings. Next slide, please. The application process is very successful in both the quality and quantity of proposals. 37 projects were submitted, at least one from each agency, requesting a total of $3.8 million. A formal review team came together to develop the funding recommendations you're seeing today. The review team was comprised of members of MPOSC, the Community Development Committee, the Equity Advisory Committee, and implementing agency staff. Each review team member reviewed and scored the projects on their own, and then the group came together to discuss them. The scores were used as a starting point for the conversation, but the review team also considered other aspects of the proposals. After much discussion, the reviewers reached consensus, and 23 projects are recommended for funding for a total of $2,054,000. Next slide, please. 16 programming projects are being recommended. The review team agreed to prioritize using the interest earnings for programming or non-capital projects, and there was enough funding available for each agency to receive these funds, so it was a pretty straightforward process. The highest scored projects include the Waukon Teepee Center Exhibit Concept Plan at the Bruce Vento Regional Trail, funding a community outreach and staff position for Washington County, and hiring youth at the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board as a catalyst for regional park awareness and increased visitation for underserved communities. Other recommended projects include expanding the Pathways Internship Program and bike outreach at Three Rivers Park District, a St. Paul Aquatics Water Safety and Drowning Prevention Program, BIPOC engagement through sports programming in Bloomington, multicultural and multilingual advertising for Minneapolis parks, a Learn to Ski program in Ramsey County, a mental health and nature-based wellness program in Scott County, a Learn to Bike program, cultural liaisons, translation services, and an augmented reality trail program, all in Anoka County, and an ADA assessment update for Carver County. Next slide, please. 7 capital projects have been recommended for funding. These recommendations were more difficult due to the limited funding available. Again, the scores were used as a starting point for the discussion, but they also considered the equity impact of the projects and the geographical distribution across the region. Most of the capital projects recommended for funding are a blend of capital and programming, or have strong community engagement and partnership, which increases their overall equity impact. The top 3 projects are the Washington County Parks on the Go outreach vehicle, Dakota County's Building and Bridging Community by creating equitable spaces along the Mississippi River Greenway Regional Trail, and the St. Paul BIPOC Ambassador Program, which received a score of 94, not 84. I apologize for the typo on the slide. I believe the staff report has the correct score. The other projects recommended are paddle sport equipment and rental station combined with learn to paddle programming and accessibility improvements for Washington County parks, creating welcoming ways to access the Eloise Butler Wildflower Garden and Bird Sanctuary at Theodore Wirth Regional Park, and equitable shore fishing access improvements in Scott County. Next slide, please. This table shows the total recommended funding by agency. Overall, there's a great distribution of equity programming projects throughout the region, and a really good distribution of capital projects considering the amount of capital funds available. Next slide, please. There are quite a few takeaways from the review committee. Overall, the review team thought the agency submitted really great proposals. They were especially pleased with the programming projects and the capital projects that had strong programming components. One of the big takeaways was that many of the projects that scored the highest seemed to be developed specifically for the equity grant program, rather than trying to fit an existing project into an equity application. Strong community engagement and partnerships were also very important. For some projects, the review team would have liked to see more diverse representation of the community involved in the design of the project. There are also some concerns around hiring BIPOC staff at low pay, such as temporary or part-time workers, as that doesn't help equity unless there's a pathway towards permanent positions. And finally, there was a desire to spread the funding beyond the urban core. Next slide, please. With that, the recommended action is that the Metropolitan Council approve funding 23 projects totaling $2,054,000 for the Regional Park System 2021 Equity Grant Program, as shown in Table 1 of the report, and to authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the Council. And thank you to everyone who helped make this program a success, especially the review team members who helped develop these recommendations. I'm happy to take questions.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, what questions do we have on this item?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Who was on the review team?
Thank you for the question, Chair and members. We had members from MPOSC, the Community Development Committee, Equity Advisory Committee, and we had a couple of agency staff.
Does that answer your question, or were you wondering who the actual MPOSC representatives of that group were?
No, that answers. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair, this is Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson. I also want to share that the work of this committee started prior to new members joining. So I think it's really a great opportunity for new members to jump in the process next year. We're really excited to have more people participate in this. And so that's a little bit of the timing of when this process actually started was quite a while ago. And it's just taken a while to get it on our agenda for final approval.
That is a good point, along with the whole explanation of what this even is, was before many of our new members joined. This has been kind of a multi-year developing project to have some dedicated funding streams directly addressing equity issues in ways that sometimes don't happen well with our regular funding. So we had a pilot program 2 years ago, and this is just our second run through it, but we have a much larger and less encumbered pot of money this time around, so we're able to do a bit more with it. So while most of our budget allocations are by formulas and just go directly to agencies based on that, this is a somewhat rare competitive grant program between them where they actually had to submit applications and have people go through and rank them for this because it's a different funding stream than our usual for this particular purpose. So we're still learning, but this is our second run through, so we're able to get a little better than our first time. That was a bit rougher learning experience. But that's what's going on here. This is a special set of money directly for equity programs. And that's why it looks a little bit different from other stuff.
hats off to the committee for their work. I would like to say that I think we are just making monumental steps forward in implementing some equity-oriented grants. And I particularly was pleased to see the $40,000 or so spent on creating broader awareness throughout the community of our park systems. So again, I encourage us to pursue that also potentially from the Met Council's purse to do some broader system-wide awareness building. But again, my compliments, because I think we really are moving this forward in a way which is terrific.
Thank you, Bob.
Tony, I'd like to offer a comment.
Yes, Jeremy.
Greg, can you back up to slide 8, please? Thanks. So I served on the review committee with Cecily and Todd and the council member, along with some others. And unfortunately, Todd and Cecily aren't here to provide their thoughts, but I wanted to emphasize a couple of the things on this review committee takeaway. We saw a big leap in community engagement and awareness of developing partnerships in advance of the application on these projects. From what I understand, that was not as strong in the first year, and that's something that I'm really hoping we can see grow in the future. Having these existing partnerships, developing rather than taking from non-park partners. You're working with them, building relationships, and then transitioning that into a mutually beneficial arrangement when equity projects are funded. That was a big piece that we saw for some of these, was that it was a proposal by an agency potentially to just come in and solve a problem without really building that rapport in advance. And so we saw growth in that area and the engagement of the implementing agencies with these partners in advance. And I think that's fantastic. The other piece was on the BIPOC staff at low pay bullet toward the end there. That the takeaway, as I recall seeing it, and Jessica, you can correct me if I'm misrepresenting, but it was not just the low pay piece, but the fact that there was not a transition plan to bring individuals and diversify the full-time, more permanent staff down the road. So it was a combination of, it's the BIPOC individual's responsibility to engage with BIPOC communities, recognizing that that is everybody's responsibility to remind everybody of their parks and trails and how this is for all of them, not just for community ambassadors to do the outreach, though that is helpful. And recognizing that diversifying the workforce more broadly is an important goal of some of these programming opportunities. The last piece I want to say, and it's not related to these bullets here, was the Metro Transit piece. I'm hopeful that we can see programming include transit and opportunities to connect individuals to various aspects of our community, and recognizing going beyond the urban core. If we're investing in these outer reaches of the parks and trails system, we should try to connect individuals who reside and work and spend most of their time in the urban core, connect them to those facilities so that we also see the diversity and the capabilities of our parks and trail system to meet their recreational needs across the whole system. And so I would love to see Metro Transit, I know that they can't apply for funds under this equities program, but if there was some way to encourage the council to bring the two silos together a little more closely when those opportunities exist, I would love to see that as part of our equity improvement with MPOSC. But I'll step down from the soapbox now. I appreciate your allowing me to share.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremy. Linnea, I don't know if your hand is up again or still.
It's up again. I'm trying to get good about using that. So Thank you. I want to make sure staff, we capture that last note as we're preparing the comments when I go to council to talk about this action that the commissioners are prepared to take. And Tony, I want to thank you for reminding me. I forgot even that some of this probably predated some of the new council members being, or commissioners being on the commission. So just a little bit more about that. Historically, the only dollars available for advancing equity had been tied to capital projects. And so that was very limiting. And we know from our own research, from what we've heard from community, that a lot of the desire is for us to improve programming, non-capital infrastructure that allows people to really connect to the outdoors. And so this is a huge win and accomplishment for this commission and for the new commissioners coming in. It's a great opportunity to continue to build on the work of equity that's been happening here. As we took part in this process, we had a number of council members who participated as well, and some members from the implementing agencies. And really the idea is that the answer for all of our challenges around equity is not just this grant program or the capital grant program. It's the conversations that we're having and the supports we're providing to agencies to advance in their work. The decisions that we're making all have an impact. And one of the implementing agencies members who were participating in this process reminded us also that we really need to tell the story of this work, because it is not just kind of unique, it is wholly unique. Other places in the country are just starting to talk about equity grant programs as this way of spurring innovation and fast tracking equity work in the outdoors. I was participating in a very robust national conversation on LinkedIn around this issue, and people were looking and asking questions and asking to share, as well as in the work that I had been doing on the state task force for outdoor recreation. So again, want to just give kudos to the work of this group, to the commission of the past, to the council members currently, and the council members that came before this current cohort who really started this work and enabled it to happen. And just words of encouragement to continue this work and the learning we have each time we're doing it by building a bigger tent, inviting more people into the conversation and to see how we're making the sausage in this particular situation. And I also just want to really hope this is a celebratory moment for you all, and I'm super excited to bring this to the council and share this inaugural grant program for us. So thank you, thank you.
Hey, thank you, Linnea. Other questions, comments, or motions for this?
This is Jeremy. I'll move the recommended action.
Okay, we have a motion for what's in the staff report. Is there a second to that?
This is Dillenburg. I second that.
Thank you. Is there discussion? Whoops, sorry. So the motion is that the Metropolitan Council approve funding 23 projects totaling $2,054,000 for the Regional Park System 2021 Equity Grant Program, as shown in Table 1 of the report, and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the Council. Is there discussion on that motion?
Yes, this is Asada Brown.
Yes.
I want to say that I'm having some difficulty in thinking about voting for this when I don't understand the projects. I've got a name of an agency, a project name, the amount of money, but I have no idea what the project is. And you're asking me to vote on something that's going to cost over $2 million. And yeah, I don't know. Some of them might be self-explanatory with the name, but something like the paddle rental, I don't know what that has to do with equity. So there's a problem with us not getting at least a little synopsis of each project so that we have a better idea of what they're going to be doing.
Sure.
That's all.
That makes sense. Yeah, of course, the full details of this were addressed with the review committee, but now that it's at this stage, it probably does make sense for us to know at least some basics. We do have some time. Would someone from staff be able to give at least a little synopsis about each of these? Enough to have some idea what we're talking about for people that haven't seen the rest of the materials?
Chair, I can do that. It's going to take a little time and it'll be a little clumsy, but I'm happy to do it.
I think that would probably be good.
Actually, I'm not asking you to do that right now and take up a lot of time. But I would say for a future reference, you've got to give us a little more information, especially when it comes to asking us to approve,
Yeah.
an expenditure.
Okay. How are other people feeling about that question at this point?
This is Dillenburg. This is gonna funny. I was actually gonna comment how great the project seems to me, and how excited that some of those, like I know Rec on the Go in Brooklyn Park is a way to reach community. I know we opened a pedal rental, and the idea was to bring, all people of color from the cities to go and enjoy kayaking and boating, things that I honestly don't have any idea how to do, or why would I want to be on the Mississippi River in a kayak, but they like it and they learn about it. So, and maybe it's because I have been in a park commission before, so I understand some of the terms that I can, have a feeling of the projects that you're telling, like, it's important having a staff full-time or part-time that is working to assess equity. That is in one of the projects also. And I also understand that this is a proposal that we are moving on, and as a proposal is going to change because all these projects change, coming and going, things happen. So I was on the other side actually, but I guess if for future you can give us a definition of, in general, a concept of what is that is happening, or which agency, or why they got to that point. Maybe I just think it will be a huge amount of work to send, I don't, I don't remember right now which Three Rivers was working on it, but the other thing is that we can always reach out to an agency that we're representing and then talk to them about it and see how they come up with those ideas. I guess that's my thinking.
Sure. Thank you. One other piece of background that I can let people know, for those who weren't here 2 years ago especially, is the first time we went through this, someone had the thought that since we established this separate review committee, that essentially they were doing everything and it just came through MPOSC at first as an information item, just saying basically, hey, they wrapped up their work. This is the list of projects they decided to fund. But then we discovered that that doesn't really work, because since it is an expenditure of money, the way statute is set up, we have to have a business item to do it. So someone did, in fact, write down the note that it has to come to us as a business item next time. But I think it kind of came with a similar level of detail as when it was an information item. So we're learning year to year on this, what the right way for this to get presented is. So if we're kind of okay with most people saying we need more detail next year, but don't necessarily need to walk through it this time, I guess I'm okay with that. But if anybody wants to hear it, I'm certainly open to doing that. Linnea.
This is Bob. I'm okay with what we have and asking for a little more detail for next year.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I see Linnea's hand yet again.
I would just offer that an idea for next year, what we do in other council business when we have an advisory group who's doing scoring on a project, is we get a little information presented to us prior to the process starting about what the scoring criteria is and what the process is like that they're going through. And I don't know that we did that with MPOSC this time it's again the first year. And so I think maybe that's something we could do 2 months before we get going, is revisit with MPOSC what are the scoring criteria. We can at that point ask for the volunteers, and also provide that additional synopsis and information afterwards in the business item, and prepare that council member or commissioners get to review prior to the meeting who weren't participating on the review committee.
Sure. We actually did have some of that for this.
I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, so at whatever we called the step where we do the request for applications, I don't remember what that was actually called, but
Notice of funding availability.
Yes, notice of funding availability. That thing, when we reviewed that, did have the scoring criteria spelled out in it and stuff, which was sometime last fall, maybe. So it still skipped over our new commissioners, but we did see that. The other thing that's particularly distinct from other groups you see, Linnea, is that most of the other advisory groups to the Met Council are established by the council's own authority, whereas MPOSC is established by the legislature in statute. And so we have some different requirements, which is why the first time through it came to us as an information item, and we had to point out that, oh, we're actually different. So there's some confusion that happens internally sometimes because we end up having to get treated differently than all of the other advisory bodies. So things have to come through us before, rather than just going straight from a special review team to the council itself. Okay, is there further discussion on this? Sounds like we're going to be okay. Jeremy.
Oh, I was just going to offer that if we need to table the motion until the next meeting to make sure we have presentations, I'm fine with that.
I'm not hearing so far that degree of desire for more.
Chair Uruso?
Yes.
This is Emmett. Sorry to interrupt, but the notice of funding availability is attached to the business item. So if people want to find it through that path, it's available. Second, I just wanted to give a little side commentary that the agencies are really kind of ready to move forward on a number of these projects this summer, and a delay of another month just cuts that summer shorter. And so I'm just expressing my anxiety about that proposal. So, so thank you.
Yeah, it looks like Linnea just posted the link to that little piece.
I didn't notice that, so thanks for calling that out. I didn't notice that little link was in there, and so folks, the full details are there for you. Maybe next time, just make that a little more obvious, maybe in the business item.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like we're seeing some notes for how to do this better next time, but not necessarily holding anything up right now, unless I hear otherwise in the next few seconds here. Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none, we will proceed with a vote on the motion for the recommended actions from the staff report. Go ahead, Sandy.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We'll start with Saad Brown.
No.
And then we'll move down to Bob Moeller. Bob Mueller. Maybe he's went to get more coffee. We'll go ahead with Jeremy Peichel.
Jeremy votes aye.
Bob Moeller votes aye.
Thank you, Bob. And then we'll go with Canna Yang.
Aye.
And next we have Monica Dillenberg
Aye.
and Tony Russo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, so that is approved. Thank you, everybody. It's exciting to see that process improve overall, expand. So I'm glad we got that going the way we hoped for. That brings us to our information item, which is our equity nudge discussion for the month. Talking about those equity grant program recommendations that we were just seeing and how do we move forward with that. So we have Amanda Lovely asking us some questions to get thinking about that.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks for the thumbs up. The question Emmett just posted in the chat, so if you'd like to read it that way, I can also read it out loud. It is reflecting on the equity grant program, recommendations, how do we move forward to further support the regional park implementing agencies and communities in this important work? We covered a bit about how to support us in doing it better, which was super helpful. So I'm just going to open it up for discussion.
I guess one question I have for those who are on the review committee and hearing from the members of that who are also from implementing agencies. One of the bits of feedback we got a lot of last time from agencies is that our scoring criteria and how we wanted applications laid out and details of essentially what we were asking for and how we would evaluate were pretty vague, and they had a hard time writing their applications for the grant to meet them. Does it seem like we succeeded in doing a better job of that this time around, and our agencies more clear on how they could apply successfully?
I'm going to pass that to Jessica. Have you heard back from agencies yet?
I think I've heard from a couple. My general feeling is that it was simplified and a little bit easier this year. We're still going to do some follow-up work with the agencies to see if they have any advice for us for next time.
And reviewers?
Yeah, this is Jeremy. I would say that the first two criteria, as listed on the notice of funding availability, were well understood. The last three varied wildly. I think there's room for improvement both in our communication about what we're looking for as a commission through this opportunity, and perhaps an opportunity for us to participate in either a virtual meeting or something to connect with partners of the implementing agencies as well as the implementing agencies themselves as the announcement comes out, or maybe perhaps in advance, to share with them our vision for what this program could look like, what success has looked like in the past, and perhaps where they could be going with their equity opportunities regionally in their application they're about to prepare. So I've seen that sort of thing be successful in clarifying this, but overall, I think the agencies understood the criteria better this time and produced generally good applications.
Okay, that is promising at least. Linnea, yes.
Yeah, I would say that, again, this was the first time, and it was a lesson learned from last time. We had other council members participate. And I think one of the observations that came up is that there were also times when it was perceived, whether it was intended or not, that implementing agencies were accessing this as a way to fund a project versus really meeting the intent of the grant. So for example, someone setting up a project that there was no clear way where equity would be accomplished through that project and wasn't spoken about. So that was something that came up, and I think that's where we can hone a little better and just say, hey, be clear, this was a person who's not involved in this work regularly, and they read it the first time and read it that way, along with some of us who are a little bit more involved in it. So that certainly is happening, and we want to be clear with agencies about that. Was another learning, I think, for next time. The other thing we talked about, and this has happened and come up in conversations, not just here, but in other places in our work, is helping folks understand what representation and proportional representation looks like, and what that means in their community, and being able to talk about it. So there's some communities that are all, you know, excited about this resource and want to lean in it to serve their community in the broadest way, and particularly addressing and getting at historically underserved and under-included and under-supported communities across, you know, race, physical ability, and are comfortable understanding, engaging, and talking about that. And then we have others that aren't as comfortable or don't know what that means, where, you know, using the words is one thing, but we are asking nuanced questions like, were the people you're seeking to serve involved in your engagement? And that can be a surprise. And what I feel like I saw from last time to this time is some positive movement in the understanding around that, but there's still a lot of room to go. So just being able to have those conversations, encouraging agencies to ask ahead of time. We also added this year when we got an application in and it didn't look right, you know, like staff were reaching out, you know, hey, we're seeing something here. And so just being able to do more of that, I think will help in the future, but we're, you know, this is again, not just a tool for getting money out the door and seeing innovation, but it's a learning tool. It's an incentive for learning. And so I think we'll see more of that. And probably the most nuanced conversation around that was around agencies who wanted to hire people, but not commit to them fully out of their budget. And the idea, and I think it's a matter of maybe perspective, do we hire people on grant money? Or if this is work an agency should be doing, should it be a part of their regular budget? And I'm sure that agencies feel different kinds of ways about that. And there's probably an egg and a chicken conversation that could happen around it. But we really think when we're talking about this from an equity perspective, that systematizing and institutionalizing this work is the equity work. So those were the big things that I took away from, and on top of just being happy to have this.
Okay, thank you, Linnea. Anyone else?
I
No,
do have a question. Sorry, Tony. So moving forward and in this grant, what is it that we are expecting of each other? You know, like what am I supposed to be looking for in my district so I can, you know, bring something to the table? Or I don't want to, you know, make more work of anything, and I'm not, you know, saying no, I'm gonna work these volunteering hours that I don't have anymore, like all of us know, right? But just how can we approach the agencies or learn about it? Is like if I hear it, you know, if anybody has an idea about that, would be great.
Sure, and I'm not sure what the answer to that really is even. I know some commissioners have meetings occasionally with agency staff and some with other community groups that are involved in some of this work, often things that they had contacts before they were on this commission even. But we don't have necessarily a particularly structured approach of anything that you're expected to do. So if anyone else wants to kind of share things that they've done, that would be helpful.
Chair, if I could.
Yeah.
This is something I have to deal with a lot in my role in different ways. So one of the first things that I do when I have an interest, or if an agency or someone in my district reaches out to me, is I contact the staff person involved with the work that's most closely related to it first, just so I can get lay of the land. Are there any issues? Is there a proposal in front of the council? So we can avoid any potential perceived conflicts of interest, and also so that I can kind of know what is going on. So that's one thing I have done and I've found really useful, is to contact staff when I have a question. And then I actually have asked staff to help by coordinating a meeting with folks in an agency And that also helps because it makes sure that they're, you know, they're in the loop and we can collaborate together and they can support anything like that. And we've done that a lot over the last year. And it's been helpful for me to approach it in that way. That's just my experience.
Thank you, Linnea. That's helpful. You know, one other thing that I keep harping on is that at some point here, we're going to need to be able to measure whether these projects are actually helping. And we've said in the past, generally the indicator of that will be usage demographics stuff. So we're not there yet, but these things will take several years to show an effect. So even though we're already on our second one, the first one isn't necessarily doing anything now, but we need to make sure that we're planning in terms of mostly Met Council staff expertise, time, and budget to make sure that our future visitor surveys are detailed and targeted correctly to tell whether the projects that have happened so far made a difference compared to past surveys. And that gets into some statistical analysis stuff that I am not an expert in, but some other people are. But it is going to cost certainly some time and money to do that stuff well. And we'll be looking for that coming up.
Tony, I'd like to build on that.
Yes.
So I would say that because this is developing capacity, we would see more than just change in visitor use. I think as we see agencies grow in this program, we should expect to see more thorough analysis, I guess, of equity in their master plans that come forward. So we can, I think, qualitatively assess the impacts of this program in developing relationships, building partner capacity, and enhancing the depth of discussion when projects come before the commission and we see that there has been learning and understanding that's grown as a result of participating in the program. And so I think as agencies are more exposed and recognizing there's a demand and a need for this equity work, we will see throughout all actions an increase in awareness and effective engagement around equity issues. So I would say visitor use, good, perhaps not the sole metric by which we should judge success for this program. Thanks.
That is very true. Also very hard to measure. So that'll be something to keep in mind. That'll be hard to know. Especially if we have rotating commission members, how can they compare to past ones? So when we have some future turnover in the commission, one of the things we might be looking for is those who are retained will need to kind of explain to new folks how does what they're seeing now compare to how was it in the last 2 years, so that there can be an ongoing sense of progress.
I may offer that we could compare historical business items to just identify the difference.
Somewhat. I don't know how many business items we can expect people to read from the past, but it's a possibility. Yes, Bob, you were saying something?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about how we can build our own knowledge of what may make a bigger difference. And I was thinking about organizations that currently have a good population of the people we're trying to reach. I was thinking about the Boys and Girls Clubs. Perhaps that's the YM and YWCAs, where they have among their membership, I'll call it, people who really enjoy the outdoors and are really probably hungry for more. And they may be a really, really good place to start to increase our ability to reach them through our equity programs and they then can tell their friends and hopefully expand it some more. So I'm just saying we may want to partner in the early stages of next year's program, for example, to get more ideas from these other agencies in terms of what might make a difference to their populations.
That's certainly true, and we do have some new staff positions since we started this work that look into that kind of stuff too. Sometimes I think Linnea's hand thing is just stuck on.
It's not stuck on. I take it down and I put it up. I try to raise my hand. I was gonna say I really like Jeremy your comments, and I think that what we heard from agency staff is that this has impacted them. So I think a way we can evaluate it too is to one, ask the agency staffs what's different for you as a part of this. Have you learned different language? Is it having impact on conversations you're having internally? You know, those are some of the things. I also could see that after a number of years of programming funds, do we see the diversification in those staff, in those agencies? These are EEO reporting agencies, or there's a number of them who are anyways. You know, are we seeing a diversification in their staff? I think there's lots of creative ways that we can evaluate and look at our impact in addition to those that have been mentioned before. And I also want to just say, I want to thank you all again. I have to step away. And so I just wanted to say thank you one last time before I had to step off, and I'm really proud of today. It's a big day for the council, for the staff, and for the commission. So thank you, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, does anyone else have comments on this item before we move on? All right, hearing none, if you do think of anything, of course, you can always email them onto staff later. But I think for now that wraps us up. Thank you, Amanda. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we let you go?
Nope, thanks for your time.
Okay, so we'll move on to our report section. I have a couple of logistical things for mine. As you know, the COVID-19 vaccine rollout stuff has been going relatively well. The governor did officially end his peacetime emergency declaration, and so some things will be changing there. Our stuff is not necessarily directly related to that emergency declaration, but of course the conditions are. So first question is related to possibly doing some site tours later this year. Just getting a sense of the room of what people are comfortable with. You know, can we do just a walking thing where people are able to space out? Would you be comfortable with sharing buses or golf carts? Would you be comfortable in rooms together? Do we need to be able to have some distance if indoors or not, or be masked or not? Does anybody have particular thoughts on those kinds of things about what your comfort level is? Because we don't know everyone's individual status. And Jeremy indicates whatever's kind of fine with him. Same with Bob. Seems like Sada's, so Sada, can you expand? Not necessarily comfortable with everything. Would some things be okay, like outdoor stuff, but not indoor, or things like that?
As of right now, I'm not comfortable being around people I don't know.
Okay. Good to know. Anyone else? Okay. That's good to know. This would probably be still a couple months out, so it's still a bit of a moving target. But we wanted to get some initial feedback for looking at possibly planning something. Might
Chair,
be,
could I offer,
yes,
Chair, this is Sandy. Could I just offer that folks, if they'd like to respond to staff individually and aren't comfortable speaking in the group right now, they could certainly forward their comments and how they feel to staff. We would appreciate that.
sure, that makes sense. And the other thing was related, which is in terms of how we conduct our meetings. We're currently doing them remotely. We are subject to open meeting law, so there are some restrictions to how that works exactly. One of the exceptions in there, which is what we've been doing, is the if one of several people make a determination that it is either not safe or prudent to hold an in-person meeting, then we can do things a different way. We've been relying on that. That can certainly still be true without the governor's emergency declaration, but it will probably be something that changes in the relatively near future. So the other question is, how do people feel about that? So if same kind of thing, if you're not yet feeling safe around others, that would be something that says maybe we should keep that exemption in play. But we're also looking at whether there's any technological possibilities for mixing the two, so that's, maybe we can be in person for people that are comfortable with it and not for those that aren't. There are some technical hurdles that staff are looking into for that, so we don't actually know if that's possible, but maybe. So I just want to kind of get that out there, and same kind of thing, you can let staff know privately where you stand. At some point, we're going to have to make a call about at what point we're still determining that it is not safe or prudent to meet in person. It's not just a personal preference thing. We have to meet that wording of the statute. So whenever the sense is that we're no longer meeting that, then open meeting law will require us to be in person again. So getting that out there and seeing whatever feedback you may have. If you care to share it now, great. If you want to email it later, that works as well. Did anyone have anything you want to say at this point?
Tony, is that ours to decide, or you're saying that at some point the decision will be made for us, no matter what we think?
It can be decided by multiple people, two of which are the Met Council's regional administrator for all council things, and the other of which is me as the presiding officer of this particular body. So to some degree, it's up to me to decide. It would be nice for other people if things are consistent across the council. So I think we're going to have a somewhat high bar if we want to say we make a different determination than the regional administrator does. It is possible, but like if we have a member with a health condition that needs different treatment than the general public, that certainly applies. Monica.
Chair Uruso and Commissioner Peichel.
Yeah, okay, so Emmett, then Monica.
Oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to get in front of Monica. While the governor's emergency orders have ended, I just wanted to reinforce one thing that the chair said, which is the council does have in the short term no plans to return to in-person meetings. The pandemic is still on, and however, that said, and I'm going to talk about this later, we're looking into doing some Parks and Open Space Commission tours in September and October. And that would, of course, I'll need to go through the council processes, but that's something that I'm talking with our chair. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, Monica?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, I have a feeling that we have more audience when it's remote because you don't have to travel. I don't have really two concerns or at all about the pandemic or COVID or any of that, but I do have concerns about getting on time to a meeting, having to cross, rush hour 94, 610, and I just to think about it, it really drives me insane. So I think it's something that we should consider, especially because we live in different districts. I'm guessing we have together, Say that aside, I'm totally open to meet and get to know the parks and meet everybody in person. That's for sure. But just a thought about that one.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the just general preference for remote meetings aspect is not something that is well allocated in the open meeting law right now. There is admittedly some extremely outdated language in there referring to like closed circuit television kind of stuff, and it doesn't even mention the existence of the internet. And my hope is that maybe the legislature at some point says, you know what, that whole pandemic thing made us realize that we should update the open meeting law and get some of that addressed. However, the legislature is, as of wee hours of this morning, now adjourned, so that's not going to happen soon, but maybe at some point. So right now we're limited to current language that pretty much only lets us do that for exceptional circumstances, or if we can concoct technology solutions that meet the rather archaic definitions that are in there currently for remote participation. But in the past, technical staff have told us that that's very difficult to do with resources we have available. So it's a bit of a moving target, but certainly I agree that this is convenient. It's just not usually legal. With that, I think that concludes my
This is Bob. I really like this hybrid ability to meet both in person, but I would also like the ability, in case of bad weather for myself anyway, to say, gee, I don't think I'll drive across town in the bad weather, and I'd like to participate online.
Yes. Yeah, some things that have come up, that are normally addressed in other aspects of the law is essentially how the public can view it, being able to actually see all of us, know who's talking, see body language, and if there's any conversations on the side, that kind of thing, and also be able to address us by something other than just email are all kinds of considerations that are part of that. So we'll have to see what comes of this, along with other changes that may be induced by the pandemic. Are there any other commissioner reports?
I have one. This is Bob.
Yes.
The Minnesota River Valley Regional Trail is now open from Eden Prairie down to Chaska and Carver. It's a wonderful view of the river valley, really nice trail, lots of cover from the trees and so forth. So it's a beautiful ride, and I'm thrilled that it's open, and I really thank the council and our committee for helping make that happen.
Wonderful. Other commissioners? All right, hearing done. Staff reports?
Yes, Chair, Commissioners. The legislative session successfully closed, and for the regional park system, there was some very good news. The Parks and Trails Legacy Fund was appropriated for state fiscal year 2022 and 2023, which the 22 year begins today. And there's over $40 million in each of the years of the biennium. So it's an exciting influx of funding, including acquisition funding. The Environment and Natural Resources bill was also passed, and that includes additional Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources funding. So that's focused on high quality natural areas, and that will provide great opportunities for future acquisitions and growth. Finally, Abdi Wahab Ali presented the operation and maintenance funding. We also, as he said, received a slight bump, about almost $1 million up from the last biennium. So that's a great step forward. So all in all, really good news from the legislative session. As I mentioned, Tony and I are talking about tours, and we know there will be different levels of comfort in terms of returning. And so please talk to us. As I think folks were suggesting, Sandy in particular, reach out to me or other staff if you have concerns about attending in person. We don't have the technology currently to host hybrid meetings. We are actively working on it, so we would have the technology to make it work, but it's just not quite yet in place. Thank you for your patience with that, and that's something that's actively being worked on right now. So, Bob, to answer your question, or Monica, we're working on it, and we would really like to offer that hybrid option because we know that would be helpful to commissioners. My final report is that the Regional Park System Admin Guide has been finalized, and it is, as of today, posted on the council's website. So this is a guide that captures the current state of our financial programs and administering parks grants. We are committed to reviewing it and updating it annually. And we really want this to be a resource for people if you have questions about how programs work. So that's great news. I can forward that out to the commissioners, the link to that guide. So big thanks to our finance unit for completing that, because I know, and big thanks to the commissioners for your patience in us getting that completed. With that, those are my reports.
Okay, and in addition to a direct link, can you tell us how we would find that just browsing the site to be able to tell other people verbally, potentially?
Yeah, to find the admin guide, it is posted on the council's parks website. I don't have it up in front of me, Tony, but I'm guessing it's in the finance section and then the parks admin guide. So.
Yep, Emmett, this is Nicole, Chair and Commissioners. I can let you know it is posted on the council's website under Parks, Grants, and Funding. And it's the first bullet there right above the fund distribution policy.
Ah, there we go. Perfect. Okay. Thank you. And are there any reports from our liaison?
I think our liaison had to leave.
That's right.
Yes.
She told us she was leaving. Wow. Spacing out. Okay, so with that then, I believe we are ready to adjourn. Thank you, everybody. All right. See you next month.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.